Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. One of the beautiful similes in Buddhism of the mind awakening to the truth is the image of the sun shining down on the lotus pond and the lotus flower gradually opening up and blooming. Just like a human mind, as we open up to the truth, then we bloom. The mind displays many qualities when we open to the truth, even though the truth itself is sometimes hard to accept. The mind blooms, so it feels refreshed, becomes clearer, brighter, could say more beautiful. But this is something that's taking place internally, and it's subtle. So to really open our mind, our heart to the truth, we have to work hard to get in touch with our own mind. Because so much of our life we're sending our mind out through our senses to the world, getting on with things, work, family, social things, and so on. And we're missing what's going on the inside, and that's why we often end up stressed. But again, with this beautiful simile of the lotus opening to the sunlight, the warmth of the sunlight, it's showing us that if we do keep directing the right qualities, bringing them up in our mind and directing the mind to look at itself, care for itself, well, slowly, gradually it can open up. We were just talking just now about other monasteries around the world that I know, so like in the UK, it's the middle of winter. Talking to Ajahn Karuniko, he's saying it was -1 degree, it's cold. So materially, we know what it's like when we feel cold. We like to seek the warmth. So we like the warmth of the sunlight. Here in the mountains of Melbourne, we notice the kangaroos in the morning, they come out to sunbathe after a cold night. Everybody likes warmth, but normally we're just focusing on the physical warmth of the world when we're cold, or the opposite, when we're too hot, we look to find ways to cool down. But we have to do the same with our mind, generate the warming qualities of the heart that will nurture the mind in a good way. You don't want too much warmth, overcook it, burn it, but not enough warmth, it remains tired, cold, inactive. So we're learning to develop this ability to turn and see what our mind needs and how to warm it up through the Dhamma, the power of the Dhamma. And just like the lotus flower, lotuses grow out of the mud. And many ponds and waterways, there's a lot of mud at the bottom and all kinds of junk. People unfortunately throw a lot of junk into ponds and rivers. And you see that all over Asia or anywhere where there are lotuses. Often they're growing up out of the mud, but even out of rubbish. So you have to bear that in mind. We're practicing looking at dukkha and stress and trying to understand it and know it for what it is. But it's not pleasant, but we have to trust in the process of the practice as we're shining the light of the Dhamma, the warmth of the Dhamma onto our heart, into this muddy mess full of rubbish. Then the lotus is gradually going to grow up out of that and bloom. But it may still be surrounded by rubbish. I remember thinking of this once when I was in Wat Nanachap, my first year. I think I was a novice still. So this is a long time ago in northeast Thailand. And in those days, our kitchen was a very simple affair. We had an open kitchen with no mod cons, charcoal fires that you made yourself, and all the rubbish tended to go towards one corner of the kitchen and just be washed down a drain, an open drain that went into a deep pit underground. So that's all the grease, whatever was washed, the spittle, the rubbish, everything went down into this pit underground. And of course, once in a while it got full, and it was just my luck. That year it was full and needed to be cleaned out. And it was one of those occasions where the teacher asked for a volunteer, and everybody stepped back a pace, and I didn't notice, and it was me stuck at the front, draw the short straw, and I had to go down into this pit to clean the bottom of it. And we could take the water out first with buckets from the top, but then as we got deeper, it was just sludge, full of rubbish, gunk. Probably the most horrible mess I've ever been in my life. And I had to go down. I just wore a loincloth and went down on a rope to the bottom of this pit, and it was so smelly. I think it was a lot of methane or whatever. You could hardly breathe, and it was very cramped, and I was just scooping sludge into buckets and sending them up to the top. And every so often I'd have to come back up to the top to catch my breath because it was so suffocating down in the pit. And at the very end of the job, where I'd cleaned it out, I was returning to the top of the pit, climbing up a rope, and I got to the top, and I was completely black and covered in smelly gunk. And there was a few tour buses that had just arrived at the monastery, and I think it was mid-afternoon or something, and 300 or 400 people were just walking into the monastery to visit, coming from Bangkok or Singapore or wherever those tour buses come from, coming up to the jungle to have a look at the Western monks. And I got to the top, I was gasping for breath, thinking I could be seriously ill if I didn't get out quickly. And then a couple of monks at the top of the pit said, "Oh, you can't come out now, there's a lot of visitors coming." And I was in a loincloth and looking really dark and smelly. And so they pushed me back down. I don't think health and safety was an important matter in those days. It was more making sure the monastery looked good. So I was pushed back down into the pit. My thought was, I'm sure a dead monk would be worse PR than just seeing a monk in a loincloth covered in gunk. But anyway, no one else agreed with me. So I had to go back down in the pit and wait about 10 minutes for 400 people to wander by at their own pace until they'd all gone, and then they would allow me out. So for 10 minutes I was gasping for breath, and I was thinking, I just hope that I'm like the lotus and that I get out of this mud one day. And I've used that reflection quite a lot in practice because looking at dukkha and suffering and stress and the problems of life is not easy. So you need the right qualities, to be generating the right qualities, that warmth shining onto your own heart so that you can open up, improve it, understand it, see what's there, see what needs to be sorted out. So using the image of the rays of the sun, just coming down to this earth, this globe, without any choice as to where they land. The sun doesn't choose where it shines, it just sends its light down. But the warming effect of the sun, it nourishes the earth, it makes things grow, warms us up physically. And we have to learn how to do that in our minds as well, because so often we're just missing them, missing out, not observing them, not understanding what's going on. One thing that happens when you're not aware is you unconsciously start to pick up biases. Right? The Buddha talked about the 4 biases of view and of mind, in that we get biased because of greed, biased because of anger, biased because of delusion, and biased because of fear. And living in the world, these 4 qualities, are constantly being stimulated in our lives. We're always falling into craving and greed and attachment for sense pleasures and pleasant experiences. Unfortunately, we meet with unpleasant, painful experiences, so we keep getting caught into ill will, anger, even hatred. We're constantly experiencing delusion, confusion. Why is life so confusing? I don't know what to do. And then fear, all our fears and anxieties about health and the world and what's going to happen and who's going to pay the bills. And it's important for us to learn to face up to these 4 biases and start unraveling them, unpicking them from our behavior, because they become habitual, ingrained habits of behavior. You give in to greed once, well, it's making it easier to be greedy a second time. And we know that because we have all kinds of addictions and obsessions and things we feel we need to be happy. And unless we kind of stop and step outside of the box a bit and look back at our lives, we might never realize that. We just follow our habits, and often they just intensify and getting worse. So we have this desire to keep accumulating new experiences, new things all the time, and feeling that we need them to be happy. So like they say in Australia, there's one of the growth industries, even through lockdown and coronavirus, the growth industry is what we call self-storage. The title already is a clue to the problem, self-storage. People are storing up all their stuff in big boxes and containers and warehouses now, because they've got so much stuff they can't store it all in their house anymore. And people are renting these places to store their accumulated possessions and stuff, and then once a year they go and look at it and then put it back in again and just keep it, because we become obsessed with making things, buying things, consuming things, collecting things. We have this sort of bias in our mind that this is going to make us happy. The more we have, the more we've got, the more places we can go, the more things we can do, the more experiences we can have. Even online, it's a virtual world online, but the more things we see and participate in, games we play, things we Google, again, the same sort of thing going on. And it creates a bias in the mind always towards seeking pleasure and seeking more. And it leads to discontent, of course. The more you want, the less content you feel. You feel you're missing out on something if you don't get more. Aversion is the same. Because life is a conditioned thing, we don't control all our experiences. We're born as human beings, and generally we have a lot of opportunities and good things around us, but still you can't escape from pain and unpleasant experiences. It's part of human life. It comes as a package, pleasure and pain. So as we're meditating, we have all kinds of aches and pains we didn't realize we had before. Now we're seeing them, so we're always wriggling around and moving and getting up. And if we're not careful, just aches and pains in the body can promote the bias of aversion and ill will. You see that sometimes when you have a pain in the body that you're regularly experiencing, and just as it starts, how you start meditating, already you notice this pain that you've seen before. Straight away the mind will go to aversion. It's so quick. It's like, oh no, not that pain again. I have this terrible pain. This is me. This is who I am. My life is just pain, pain, pain. It's like a little tape recording that goes on. Even though we may only have just started to experience that pain, the mind, because of its bias, goes straight into the aversion, starts thinking in the negative way. And that's just one aspect of our life, aches and pains in the body. And it may affect the way we behave. Biases affect the way we behave with other people, with ourselves. You say, I can't do anything today because I've got a headache. Don't talk to me now, I've got a backache. I think the worst of all is toothache, isn't it? When you meet someone with a toothache, they're ready to destroy the world because they have strong pain and they're not used to it. But these biases are affecting us all the time. Greed, anger, delusion. We're constantly going to states of fuzziness, confusion, not clear about the world and our world and what we're doing and what we want and how to achieve it. Not clear about things, not clear about other people, not clear within ourselves. Mistaking things, mistaking our perceptions, thinking something is good when it's not so good, thinking something is bad when it's actually good. Delusion is, the hardest of all to root out of all these biases. It's always there underlying our judgments and opinions and views. The last one, fear. It comes up all the time because of this attachment to the sense of self and what we identify with, this body, fear about my health, or danger to my body, threats. How much fear has been conditioned by the spread of coronavirus, even though many people haven't caught it, or they have caught it but recovered. Unfortunately, some people have died, but if you look as the world as a whole, people's minds, how much of the bias of fear has been stimulated by this anxiety about where we go, what we do, people around us, who's got it. Sometimes people become very unreasonable when they look at other people, they look at them with suspicion, or they try to impose their rules on other people because they're afraid of coronavirus. And that's not, it's not unreasonable to be cautious and aware and careful around things like disease management and infectious disease. But what we're doing here is looking at the bias in our behavior that becomes like an automatic response: fear, worry, anxiety. And particularly the fear is an important one because if you're not aware of it, how it's affecting your thinking, your behavior, well, it can have very damaging effects to our physical health as well as our mental health. The illness or the threat of illness is one thing, but then what we think about it, the fear, the anxiety, can be as bad or even worse. So now we know from, the benefits of developing more awareness through mindfulness practice, learning to contemplate our experiences using the framework of the Dhamma, developing the skillful qualities such as goodwill, mindfulness, compassion, wisdom, This can really help our physical health. But in the same way, our health can go down very quickly because of anxiety and fear. And the way we relate to other people, as soon as we've got fear arising in the mind, it's like a label, a perception we slap onto an experience or a place or a person. And it just generates automatically then, because we haven't seen the bias, how it's hiding in our mind and in the conditioning process of our mind. So it's just ready to come out. You could say, well, it's just instinct for human beings to be fearful of threats. Of course it is, but we're learning to rise above that, not just to follow instinct, or at least to understand instincts when they arise, and to be able to see the difference between, say, the general or normal heedfulness and carefulness of a human being going into unknown situations or facing different situations, and the anxieties and fears that take over the mind, that are not coming from mindfulness or wisdom, but they're coming from bias, where we can spend our whole time just keep reverting to this state of anxiety, worry about ourselves, and often about things that are very unimportant or not really necessary to our well-being. We still worry about them, get anxious about them, say like what other people think of us, or news about things that don't really affect us. All kinds of things in our life, our mind, out of its bias, just latches onto them, thinks about them, brings them in, makes them seem really important, and then they start to condition us habitually to the point we can become very unhappy people. So, how to deal with these biases in the way we perceive the world, look at ourselves? Well, coming back to the practice of the Dhamma, developing sila, which calms our body and mind and keeps us out of trouble. Mindfulness, developing mindfulness so that we are more aware of ourselves from moment to moment, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we're doing. And then wisdom, cultivating wisdom, the ability to reflect on our experience and really look at it more closely and observe what's going on. A lot of our fears are self-generated and not coming out of any real threat or real problem. They're just a perception we've put onto our experience. And we can think up fear out of nothing. Of course, you might say one of the biases of delusion is to be not afraid in a situation you should be afraid. So of course there are times where we have to be very careful in life because of risks and danger. And it might be the bias of delusion to not care or not be careful. So it's like you can't win. Your mind is going to one bias or the other all the time. But we have to investigate them and look at things and look at what it's doing to the mind and look at it with wisdom and how this may be causing us stress and suffering, and particularly the unnecessary suffering of life because of a bias, a prejudice, an attachment that we've picked up over time. And it may be a lifetime of work. We've gradually dragged this mind down into the mud of the biases, and now we have to, little by little, bring the mind up out of them again through this practice, turning the light of the Dhamma back on ourselves and being more honest and observant of what's going on. So, one of the teachings the Buddha gave for dealing with the biases of the mind, states of stress, confusion, extreme desires, they always come back to think of something that is very powerful and meaningful to you as a person. So normally that would be maybe thinking of the Buddha, recollecting the Buddha as our teacher, not only with gratitude and appreciation, but also thinking of the qualities, recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, the wisdom, the compassion. So that's why this practice of reciting the word Buddho, which is just one word, but it refers to the Buddha, the awakened mind of the Buddha, and our own capacity for awakening. It all fits into this one word, Buddho. And at a time where you maybe are confused, stressed, afraid, anxious, those times often we don't think so straight. We can't think so skillfully. When you're angry, you can't think skillfully, make decisions. So traditionally, the Buddha encouraged us to, at those points where we are stressed and the mind is all over the place, emotions are coming up, come back to recollect the Buddha. Recite this word Buddho, or chant the chant Itipiso, recollection of the Buddha, in Pali or in English or your own language. Do something at that point that holds your mind's attention to help pull it back from this bias, the emotions that have come up, as a starting point. You know, people sometimes they say, well, what good will that do? Just reciting Buddho, Buddho when I'm afraid or stressed. Well, one thing it does is it brings your mind back to the present moment. You recollect the Buddha, brings up mindfulness in the present moment. That in itself is weakening the bias in the mind at that moment that's arising. So you might immediately feel a little bit better, especially if the recollection of the Buddha and the word Buddho has some meaning for you. It's like a refuge. You come back to that word at that moment, and already you feel a little bit better, steadier, and changes your attitude, changes your perception. And part of meditation is bringing up skillful perceptions, which nourish the mind or open the mind up to the truth, so that we can abandon the unskillful perceptions which have been affecting us and causing us the stress and the suffering. So that means sometimes you have to think it through as well. Think through, what does the Buddha mean to you? What qualities does the Buddha represent to you? Think it through so that when the time comes that you're reciting the word Buddho or recollecting the Buddha or chanting Itipiso, you know, that very quickly those qualities are coming up into mind, and they have this wholesome, warming effect on your mind. So of course you don't have to do this just when you're stressed. Anytime you can do this, but particularly when you're stressed, you'll find that it helps to get through that particularly difficult situation where your mind is tempted to follow the biases, go into anger or worry, but now you're holding attention on Buddho, recollecting the Buddha and giving meaning to something that is very powerful and very wholesome. You know, as we practice more meditation and we get more experience developing mindfulness and then reflecting on our experience, you see that so much of our suffering is just we're giving importance to states of mind, perceptions, ways of thinking that just create suffering and don't solve our problems and don't lead to any real benefit for us. But out of habit and not being aware from moment to moment, well, we keep doing it. So we're learning to bring up more mindful awareness, look at the different states of mind we're experiencing with the eye of mindfulness and wisdom. As I was saying earlier today, just reflecting on the Buddha can already steady the mind, bring up a sense of well-being, goodness in the heart. or sometimes just reflecting on an aspect of the Dhamma that the Buddha also represents. So representing the Buddha, we have the teaching on impermanence. Sometimes people say, well, one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. So when you see impermanence, it leads you back to the Buddha, the recollection of the Buddha. Or recollecting the Buddha brings up the recollection of impermanence. So as your mind becomes steadier, as you bring up mindfulness and reflect on the Dhamma, you're looking at your experience now with the eye of the Buddha, say, with mindfulness, with goodwill, and looking at whatever mental state is arising, whether it seems very good, skillful, very unpleasant, ugly mental state, or just confusion or dullness, the whole range. You're bringing up this ability to look at your own experience as just mental states that are conditioned, coming up, but then passing away, and not giving them too much importance, not grasping onto them with your mind, but just watching. Especially on a meditation retreat like this, we can really do a lot of just watching and observing with a good attitude, attitude of kindness, well-wishing for ourselves and then for others, and just observing and looking at the way things are rather than rushing after every thought, every opinion, or reacting to every feeling or sensation that comes up. But maintaining that steadiness of mind and the ability to look and see the way things are and not give too much importance to our moods and our thoughts, because that's where we get lost again. Get lost in the biases of the mind. So as you meditate, you may experience greed arising, ill will arising, confusion, dullness arising, fear arising. But now you're just looking at these as mental states. Mental states that arise from a cause, but they have this one thing in common: they pass away. It's the fundamental teaching the Buddha gave us. All things that arise from a cause must pass away. However overwhelming and powerful the emotional state is, the grief, the sadness, the anger, the worry, the fear, or a lot of the time it's very mundane thoughts, views, opinions, random images, the sort of things, much of our meditation is made up with these more mundane, random things. But they all have this one thing in common. Whatever arises must cease. So that's the nature. Something that's born must die. Something that arises into existence must pass away because it's a condition. Something that is not there all the time. And what's not there all the time is not really a person or a being or a self in the normal way we would think of. They're passing mental states. So this is a basic reflection you're coming to see that you can apply to these biases of mind. Okay, greed arises, you understand you've been greedy before, so it stimulates a new situation, seeing nice food, thinking about something in your meditation, you're just imagining something you like. Greed is stimulated, but now take that step back and say, whatever arises must cease. It's the one thing I know about this experience, is it's transient, temporary, impermanent. Or ill will, you have a pain or a bad memory arising. The one thing you know for sure is whatever arises must cease. You're training this awareness with mindfulness, and this has a very nourishing, warming effect on the heart because it gives you a sense of peace and even separation or distance from all these biases that we've been experiencing for so long. It's not that we can just drop everything in our lives and let it all go in one go, but we can develop right view and the right attitude, the right way of looking at our experience as we're practicing meditation. And we can see everything arises, whatever arises, must cease. it was like that in the past. So, like, if you've been on a meditation retreat before, you've experienced this in the past, watching your mind, watching different thoughts, moods, emotions, feelings arise, pass away. You've done it before. In between last meditation retreat to this meditation retreat, in between, you've observed and witnessed things arising and ceasing. And no doubt if you go on another meditation retreat next year, the best meditation retreat of 2021, the world becomes free from COVID, everyone's happy, go on a meditation retreat. Still, it's got to be a matter of things arising and ceasing. Because the Dhamma is timeless, akaliko, these truths are just the truths of the way things are. But normally we're so deluded we miss them, and then we give it so much importance to every thought, every opinion, and every twinge in our body that we become caught up in it, attached to it, and suffer with it. But these truths are liberating for the mind. The more we bring our mind to the Dhamma, and the Dhamma is there all the time. It's not like you have to go anywhere or find anything, create anything. All you're doing is bringing your mind back to see what's there already. Sometimes they use the phrase coming home. You're coming home to the Dhamma because it's already there in our experience. It's just we're missing it because our mind is always biased and prejudiced and attached. So now we're stripping away the biases, the prejudices, we're seeing through them, transcending them, getting back to just seeing the way things are. One of the problems we have with meditation is we're always looking for the next experience, the next high, the next insight, the next big thing. It's another bias, isn't it? Always got to have something that we're going to get, a result that we can talk about, feel good about, and so on. But all the teachers I've talked to, all the meditators I've talked to, seem to have progressed in their practice. They say one thing in common is that the peaceful mind that is seeing and experiencing Dhamma, things as they are, is just normal. It's the truly normal mind. Not just COVID normal, but normal. The normal mind of the Dhamma. You may experience bliss and great sense of joy sometimes, and deep contentment and all kinds of good things as well, but the mind is actually just normal. It's normal because it's seeing things as they are, seeing conditions as conditions, things that arise, pass away. The physical body arises, passes away. The mental states we experience from moment to moment, feelings and perceptions, they arise, they pass away, and just being at peace with the normality of that and seeing that as just normal. Not going to dukkha, not creating suffering out of these changes, out of not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, and all the kinds of experiences we have to go through, but just seeing the normality of living in the world in this way, with a living, breathing body that has senses, see things, taste things, touch things, smell things, hear things, that arise and pass away. So we say one who sees the Dhamma is, somebody who comes to this point where the mind is truly normal. And there's everybody who doesn't yet see the Dhamma who's slightly off, slightly weird, slightly crazy, because of the biases of mind. It affects the way we think, the way we talk, the way we interact with each other, and causes all kinds of trouble in the world. But these biases, ultimately, they're not self, they're not you, they're just biases of mind that have come up out of misunderstanding and lack of awareness. They're not anybody, they don't belong to anybody, they aren't anybody, they're not a self, they're just biases of mind, mental defilements that nobody owns them. So if you get to the point where you can see a defilement, a bias, as a defilement, that's it. It's just what it is. It's just something arises, passes away, and you can let it go, leave it alone. So what makes people's minds normal and peaceful and content is this ability to see things as they are and then just let go. All the way through the practice of the Buddhist teachings, from dana to sila to bhavana, samatha, vipassana, whatever aspect you're looking at, it's giving you this mental skill of seeing things as they are and then just letting them be, stepping back, peeling back the layers of self, getting this place of normality where you just let things go quite naturally, because to take them up is a burden. To hold on to every thought, every reaction, every opinion, it's burdensome. It leads to inner conflict, leads to conflict with other people. Much better just to let things go. So we're here at the end of 2020. We can let everything go, all the suffering of 2020, all the greed, anger and delusion of 2020. We just let it be, let it go, and move on from it. Just walk away from it and maintain our practice of the Dhamma, and little by little, these things won't return because you won't pick them up again. The more you practice, the less inclined you are to pick up the causes of suffering and the biases and the prejudices of the mind. The mind becomes freer and freer, and that's our goal. So we have a bit of time left. Now I'll leave the talk there, and then we can carry on with our meditation.